When you guys come into my law offices, you bring me a contract and you say, Krystle, we just got our record label agreement and you'll ask me to review this. Now, over the course of my career, I have reviewed the small label deals that might be something 3 to 5 pages, all the way up to the major label deals, which will be sometimes over 45 pages long. What is common to all of these agreements is that there are standard terms, and there are standard things that the labels try to do. And in my experience, I've seen that the little labels try mimicking the big labels. And so sometimes these tiny labels that don't have too much to offer will be asking for quite a lot. Most musicians don't know one from the other, and so that's why I am here to help. In today's video, I want to go through the most essential terms that you guys need to be aware of to stay safe. So, today's video is dedicated to understanding record label contracts. Hi guys, I'm Miss Krystle. I'm an entertainment attorney, public speaker, and author of How to Keep Your Dukes Up in the Music Business. I'm the owner of Dukes Up Records, and most importantly, I'm an independent musician. So, we gotta just jump right into this. One of my musicians, she received an offer from a mid-sized record label to sign, and I wanted to start with talking about the term. When we talk about the term, it is basically how long are you going to be signed to this contract or how long are you signed to the record label. And the way that is typically worded is a little confusing because it usually, sounds something like the initial term will be, let's say, 12 months from the initial release date of your record, because most of these deals are for actual albums. Now, side note, we do actually do deals for singles and EPs and that kind of thing, but in this scenario, we're going to use albums. So it will be from the release of the album for 12 months thereafter. That's the initial term. And then you'll see things like options. Now, by comparison, for this particular artist, she had received not just the initial term, but 3 additional options for the label, which basically means that the label can continue to now have 3 separate cycles on top of the initial one. So let's say roughly if that initial cycle ended up being a year and a half. Okay, so we said 12 months from the date the music was released, but let's say it took you 5-6 months to actually make the record from the time that you had signed the contract. So now we're a year and a half into this relationship. That can feel like a long time. Now, thereafter, we're saying we're going to repeat that for another 3 times. So then with the 3 additional cycles, what does that tally up to? I mean, we're talking about 4 years now, bare minimum. So it actually is a pretty significant contract, potentially. Now, the label may not decide to exercise those options. Maybe they decide to drop you. But in my experience, some of my musicians and bands have just been shelved. So they're not released from the contract. The label stops putting money, time, and effort into the marketing, into the production, and then nothing really happens. And so now you're just stuck into a contract because you said you'd give them the additional options, which let's say the label has exercised. So for me, the note here is try to get as few options as possible, because also it gives you an opportunity to renegotiate the terms. Once you get through, let's say you're winning, you're succeeding, your numbers are great, by the time you get to that second or third option, you want to renegotiate for a better deal. And I will say by comparison, for one of the last major label deals that I did, the label right out the gate, and this was for a very successful independent musician, but right out the gate, the label wanted to do not just the initial term, right? So let's say that's roughly a year, year and a half, but 5 additional terms. So those would be through options. So that in essence can end up being a hugely long contract, and because the artist was doing so well at the time and still, there just was no need. And so to give up as much as the label was asking didn't make sense. So that's kind of your super pro tip. Just remember that even if you have an awesome offer from a major label or some label that you're excited to work with, it doesn't mean you have to take it. And it really should be something that you're comfortable with, especially when it comes to giving up rights to music, the length of the contract, that kind of thing. The other really important consideration comes when we're talking about advances and funding from the record label. So, first of all, when we talk about an advance, let's say the label approaches you, and even in the deal that I did for one of my artists, they're offering 40 grand. 40 grand up front as an advance. And that's money that the artist can then just put in her pocket. Yay, fantastic, who doesn't like 40 grand? But remember that record labels are essentially just glorified banks. They're not just giving that to you because they're nice people and they just want to help you out. They're giving you that money as a loan essentially that they're then going to pay themselves back from the earnings from your music and usually from other things which we're going to talk about. So in my scenario, we're talking about $40K. To pay back $40K can sometimes take a while, so that means the artist may not actually be seeing money for a while. Let's say in a big label, my artist was offered $100K. But then it gets split up because now a portion of that goes towards, let's say, attorney's fees. A portion of that goes to recording costs. So the artist, even though they got a $100,000 advance, only ends up putting in their pocket, let's say, 50 grand. So, you know, all I want to say is just because there is a carrot of someone offering you money to do a deal, don't get too blindsided by that because you could usually make that money yourself doing other things. But, you know, most importantly, just being it is a loan and you are going to have to pay it back. Once we get past the advanced discussion, now we're talking about royalties. So royalties being you are making money through streams, digital downloads, wherever that happens to be, let's say Amazon, and maybe even other aspects of your career. You're performing, you're selling your merchandise, and you're doing really well overall. Hey, you got some sponsors. But now what we care about is how much money are you actually making from the music? Because in most instances, number one, you are giving away your music to the label. That is what you are doing and selling your soul for the deal. The label keeps the masters, they keep the ownership, but then you benefit because hopefully the label's coming with a whole bunch of experience and team and they can really make something happen for your career. So when we discuss the royalties, what is common, especially for independent musicians, is that let's say you're doing pretty well. You have good numbers on Spotify, you have people showing up to your shows, and you get an offer from a label. The royalty might even be something like 14%, 15%, even up to 16%. And what that means is that from the entire pie of music revenue, the label is first going to take from the top. It's going to take from what's called gross receipts. And they do that to pay themselves back. Then whatever is left over is called the net. Now from the net, that's where you get your percentage. And so if there wasn't a whole lot of net because the label is still paying themselves back, you don't get paid. If now the label has recouped, and so now they can start generating some revenue for you, you know, 14, 15%, it's pretty small, unless you're doing huge numbers. So once again, this is just another place where you can definitely negotiate up, if possible. For one of my artists that got an offer from a major record label, the opening offer was for 16%. And for an independent artist that's doing real well, let's say we're in the millions and millions of plays on Spotify, doing something around 18 to 20% is closer to what I would try to get on the deal. So kind of keep those numbers in mind and know that that's just generally the range of what royalty split looks like for the musician. Co-publishing or publishing. So when we talk about publishing, usually publishing is handled by a separate entity altogether or a different arm of the record label. Now, in most instances, I swear, record labels are offering distribution deals these days. More often than not, all they're saying is that I'm going to get you distributed through one of the larger distribution companies, and so we'll get your music, we'll get you on Spotify playlists, and we're going to get you a lot of opportunities that you couldn't just distributing yourself. So that's kind of a side note, but and that's kind of why I argue sometimes it's better just to go straight to the distributors and just cut out the record label. But a lot of labels will try to dip into your publishing. So what that means is that if you are getting publishing revenue because your music is now being put in TV, film, and it's called sync licenses or sync revenue, what they'll try to do is dip into that because they're not going to do the work. They're not pitching you necessarily to get into TV, to get, you know, into motion pictures, but they want a piece of the pie. So they'll do things like either revenue participation, they'll include it in what they're entitled to recoup from, or they'll say first right of refusal. First right of refusal is basically they get to negotiate your deals, they get to be your publishing house, and there's a lot of pros and cons to why you want to do this, why you don't want to do this. Unless a company is walking in, they know this is the genre that they work in, they can get you those placements. I usually try to stay away from giving away these rights because, again, most of these labels are just getting you distributed. They're not actually stepping in because they are the expert on getting these placements. And so whenever right, you know, or possible, I'll push back on this. And the same will go for merchandising rights. When it comes to merch, sometimes this is the best way that we can make money through our live shows and our merchandise sales. And even though the label's not going to volunteer to pay for your merch, They're not going to promote your merch. They're not going to set up your merch. They nonetheless will try to dip into your merch sales because they know that's how you're generating revenue. So in the best case scenario, we try to just exclude merchandising rights altogether. If the label isn't going to be putting in money or using, let's say, if they have a sub distributor or a sub licensee or someone who can actually do the merch for you, if they're not contributing anything, I usually push back and I say, look, no, you're not going to get a piece of this. But then also they'll do what's called a first matching right. And so they'll say, well, if you do happen to get a real fancy deal from someone who's going to make your merch, you got to come back to us and you got to give us an opportunity to match that deal. So essentially a label would be able to then step in and then usurp that opportunity. And I've seen this play out in a lot of bad ways before, because maybe they'll, take on the rights, but they're charging more than the other company would have. Maybe the company doesn't do as well as the company you wanted to go through. So, for me, I try to stay away from this, and I try to make sure the rights ultimately stay with the artist on who they want to work with, who they want to distribute through, and really all of that. Those two, right, so the publishing and the merchandising, go into a category that I would consider ancillary rights. So this is the glorified 360 deal I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. 360 deals are very popular and pretty much in every contract with record labels that I see today. And they essentially give that record label the ability to dip into anything you're doing within your entertainment career to get its revenue portion. And, from a fairness standpoint, the record label, let's say, is invested, $100 grand, $200 grand into you. And maybe your streaming revenue isn't really as high or doing as good as the label wants. So the way that the label can recoup is from the areas you are making money from. So maybe you kind of on a side hustle, you're doing studio time for other musicians, you are writing songs, maybe you get some acting gigs, maybe you do some voiceover. There's a lot of different things that you could do within your music career. And so what we do with the 360 deal or these ancillary rights is the label is now going to dip into those other ways of making money. While we usually can't get completely out of this because this is just unfortunately where the industry is right now as far as industry standard, what you can do is ask for what's called exclusions. Exclusions are the areas that you say unequivocally you cannot take from, and it might be something like if I start a partnership. If I start a limited liability company that has nothing to do with really this, and I'm selling real estate, or it's some kind of side hustle that's really not a part of what I do as an entertainer, you ask that those things be excluded. You ask for things like, let's say, advances. If you get an advance from some kind of distribution company or a publishing company, you ask that basically the label does not take from those certain earnings. So at a minimum, understand that most labels are going to try and take from those additional places to generate the revenue. Nonetheless, if you can, negotiate an exclusion list. Now, when I started this video, I was talking about the great and drastic difference between the length of some of these contracts that I'll review, and of course the ones being, in the 40 and 50 page range. And sometimes there's just stuff you gotta gulp at, and just the amount of rights being sought by some of these labels. It's definitely a decision that you have to make as far as your trust. And so this goes to my next point. You need to make sure that you actually do your research on these labels. I can't tell you how many times someone is offered, a contract, a deal. The contract looks great. There's nothing wrong with the four corners of the terms being offered, but then you look into the actual company and they're doing nothing. They're not posting on their social media. They have no artists that are doing very well. And so all those things need to actually play into your decision, not just because, let's say, maybe even you will get a good offer. Maybe there's a nice advance up front. Maybe you own some of your music still. Before you do anything, make sure you actually do your due diligence. And the best way to do that, of course, is through a competent attorney that, if this person has experience in the industry, they're on the ground floor, they know what's bullshit and what isn't, that's the kind of person that you need on your side. So I'm actually a proponent for artists, whenever possible, having different attorneys that they can go to for different problems. Okay, so one attorney might not be the best person, let's say, to deal with your life estate stuff, or maybe you got a DUI, or maybe it has to do with your publicity. When you have someone walking in to negotiate a contract that might be for the next 4 or 5 years of your life, you want to make sure that not only you really have a shark on your side, you have someone who's willing to fight tooth and nail to get you absolutely every single percent, every single dollar that you possibly can, and that they're not going to roll over, because at these labels, they have very aggressive attorneys who are going to do the exact same thing. But you also want to just make sure that it is the person who actually has your best interests at heart. And so I've had multiple scenarios where a musician gets an offer and there's an incentive for the attorney to make the deal happen, because maybe the attorney gets a portion of the advance. And I see that even for deals that I've read. And so as part of the deal, maybe there's going to be a kickback of $5,000 or more for the attorney, and it's to cover the musician's costs, as they're going through the first steps and things like that. But nonetheless, that incentive might sway the attorney. You don't want that kind of person sitting next to you who could be swayed. You want to know that the person in your corner has got your back no matter what. And of course, besides just having the best of intentions, because I'm sure most attorneys have the best intention when you hire them, someone who's just competent. You need someone who understands what they're reading. These things are so complicated sometimes, and if someone isn't actively practicing in this area, it can go horribly wrong because they don't really know what it is that they're reading and they can't communicate that, but of course they don't want to tell you that because they're trying to make some money. So for all those reasons, stay safe, do your research, and have the best attorney for you. And of course, my book, How to Keep Your Dukes Up in the Music Business, is now available on Amazon, and we have it for you in 3 different versions: the physical copy, Audible, so I can just read you my book, or Kindle, so you can read it on your device. And I'll say this, look, there's 8 contracts in this book, and that's really one of the most valuable thing about this book. These are the contracts that my musicians pay for every single time, that everyone needs. And so it includes things like your management agreements, as well as your record label agreements. And so this one, in fact, is drafted for if you want to start a record label. So there's a ton of value in this book, and I definitely tell you guys and challenge you to check it out. We release videos just like this once a week to help you with your music careers and getting you to the next level. We're talking about everything from copyright to trademarks to music marketing and everything in between. Make sure you come and say hi on social media, because why not? I'm the most active on Instagram and TikTok of late, because we're all on this journey to understanding and mastering TikTok. If you like this video, please be sure, give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe, turn on those bell notifications so you don't miss another video from your new favorite redhead. I'm gonna get out of here. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you on the next one. I'm Miss Krystle. Bye.